Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and begin. So good afternoon to our viewers on Facebook and my colleagues. June 27, which is today, marks the 10th anniversary of the opening of the University of the West Indies Museum. It also marks the opening of the regional headquarters building. The development of the museum in terms of what it is today is definitely owed to the ingenuity and important foundational work done by the founding curator who's with us today, Dr. Frances Brown. Not only did she systematically research, document, and exhibit, she also established a framework for sustainability, both within the department and for its survival at the university at large. But the work that she has done and the work that we all continue to do is located within a complex kind of institutional and regional environment. The University of the West Indies sociocultural, economic, intellectual, political development is shaped by landscapes and events within individual countries, events within the region, as well as events that occur globally. What role do museums play in documenting and shaping the university's history and everyday life? Who decides what memories are valid? And how do we engage in the process of memory making on the campus, and what are the challenges? Today, I'm speaking with colleagues who are in the business of museums, are thinking daily about memory making in general and its implications at the institution that we work or continue to interact with on a daily basis. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Susan Frances Brown, who's founding curator and also research fellow. She's of the University of the West Indies Museum. She's a historian and curator who has worked on Jamaica's plantation period, World War II camps in Jamaica, historic Kingston, and the heritage of the University of the West Indies. From 2012 to 2019, she was founding curator at the University of the West Indies Museum, which reflects on the history, development, and impact of the regional institution. Previous research into the Uwi Mona campus site led to the publication Mona, Past and Present, which is the Bible, the history and heritage of the campus site, and a 2008 PhD thesis on Gibraltar Camp, a World War II evacuee, refugee, and internee camp. She has also co-authored the Old Iron Bridge, Spanish Town, Jamaica, and published works of youth fiction, and has worked and taught in the fields of media and communication. Our second speaker today is Dr. Alison Ramsey. She is She is a lecturer in cultural and heritage studies in the Department of History at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, where she teaches courses in history and heritage studies. She holds a BA in history with first class honors from the Cave Hill campus, a master's in history from the University of the South Pacific, and a PhD in cultural studies with high commendations in cultural studies from the University Cave Hill campus. Her research interests include fraternal organizations, museums, festivals, landships in Barbados, cultural and heritage studies, Caribbean heritage, and Caribbean history. Her recent publications include Corpova and Carnival in the Archives of Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago, Archiving Caribbean Identity, Records, Community, and Memory, which was published in 2022. Also includes the Cropover Festival, Reinventing Tradition in Post-Independence Barbados, published in the Journal of Barbados and Museum Historical Society. And lastly, I would, in summary, mapping a musical journey of soca in the Cropover Festival of Barbados in regional discourses on society and history shaping the Caribbean. And lastly, First Day Covers, a visual archive of Caribbean history and heritage in the Journal of Caribbean History, available at University of the West Indies Press. Our last panelist will be Dr. Shireen James Williamson. She's a senior lecturer and museum curator at the Department of Geography and Geology at the University of the West Indies Uwi Mona campus. She's a geologist by training with a BSc in Bachelor's in Earth Science and a PhD in Geology from Uwi Mona. Currently, Shireen applies her geology to research in geoheritage, geoarchaeology and geoscience education. She recently received the UNESCO International Geoscience Program grant for her project, Bringing Geoheritage to Life. This project works jointly with IGCP 692, which is Geoheritage for Resilience, and she was one of the principal investigators for the UNESCO commissioned survey of the potential for geoparks in small island developing states. She's currently Associate Dean for Undergraduate Student Matters in the Faculty of Science and Technology at UMONA, a past president of the Museum Association of the Caribbean, and serves as editor of the Caribbean Museums and Caribbean Journal of Earth Science. Dr. James Williamson holds membership with various local, regional, and international organizations. Colleagues, thank you so much for joining me here today. So what we're going to start out for our audience is that we're going to have Dr. Francis Brown speak first, then Dr. Ramsey, then Shireen, and then Dr. James Williamson, sorry. And then, and then we're going to go into some series of questions. Our goal today is really to open this with not just a reflection and celebration of Uwi Museum's 10th anniversary, but also to begin the kind of conversation of what it means to be working on the campus and to be doing the business of memory making and what are the implications for the Uwi. So I'm going to ask Dr. Francis Brown to go first.
Thanks very much, Shani. It's a pleasure to join you here today. So let me go back in time just a little. In 2012, at a conference to mark the 50th anniversary of Uwi's leases, I spoke of the imminent establishment of the UWI Museum in the context of efforts to raise awareness of heritage resources and to ascribe value to them. And this is one of the things that I said. This museum will seek to reflect on the institution's development, as well as the region to which it is connected. It will provide a context and a purpose and contribute to ascribing a sense of value to artifacts of the university and the region. Artifacts that may not just command attention in terms of helping to ground the institution historically, but also be of use in research and in extension of intellectual discourse via exhibition. A month later, on the afternoon of the 27th of June, 2012, this curator literally worked until the moment people approached the door to mount a small exhibition titled Origins in the newly branded space off the lobby of the new regional headquarters building. The Vice Chancellor, Professor Nigel Harris, had carved out the space, which was repurposed to fit the need, with some well-appreciated advice from the DC firm of Staples and Charles, and through constant negotiation with the architects over issues like thickness of walls and height of ceilings. Efforts to locate artifacts of the early UWI, then the UCWI, had been helped by enthusiasts like Rodina Reed, then of the Mona Secretariat, who captured old hall crockery and cutlery squirreled in corners of the maintenance warehouse. And Professor Robert Lancashire, who among many other contributions, found us a copy of a film on the young institution made in 1953 by the Jamaica Film Unit, one of the first color films made in the region and an amazing story in itself. Helping to raise polls and hang posters, even as speeches related to the opening of the RHQ went on outside, were then University Archivist John Aarons and his then deputy Stanley Griffin. When the ceremonies finished and the guests poured into the RHQ lobby, the first point of interest to which they came was the museum. And our first visitor, accompanied by the university's top officers, was then Jamaican Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller. From that moment, the museum served a very practical purpose as one of the most interesting publicly accessible features of the regional headquarters building. In the first 7 years of its existence, the Uwi Museum curated more than a dozen exhibitions, some major, like the 2018 Confrontations Exhibition that explored student protests at the Uwi on the 50th anniversary of the iconic October 1968 Rodney protest against the Jamaican government's banning of the controversial Uwi graduate and lecturer. Not coincidentally, 1968 was also a year of student protests around the world. Other Uwi Museum offerings were defined as mini exhibitions, often focusing on areas that we would further research and revisit, while still others were pop-ups to accompany panel discussions on relevant topics. And I think it's really worth going to the museum website at uwi.edu/museum, and it records the exhibitions as well as much of the other work that has been done then and since. In the past 3 years, under a new curator, efforts to explore relevant topics in which the university has played a central part have continued, despite the drag of the COVID pandemic, which kept doors closed to in-person visitors. Concurrent with research, collection, and exhibition, the museum reached out to collaborate with university departments and halls, worked on events and permanent installations within the RHQ, and developed a strong collaborative relationship with the UWI archives, highlighting the important interface of preservation and conservation, research, communication, and exhibition. Collaboration with the Department of History and Archaeology and the Department of Library and Information Studies regularly brought students into the museum for teaching and learning opportunities. The Department of Literatures in English film class was another fixture, and some other departments also made more occasional connections. The marketing and communication and business development offices were quick to see the benefits of the museum as a stop for visiting groups, including literally thousands of school children from across Jamaica on research days, GIS days, and other times when students visited. Communication was recognized as a vital need. We are streaming on Facebook, but the museum's first reach into social media was the UWI Museum blog on WordPress, which remains an important informal source on many aspects of university history. And there are even more opportunities online, as Shani and I have so often discussed, beyond social media, which could help to bridge the very real physical divides, which are a factor for a museum that reflects on regional actors, on a regional actor, and histories and realities not bounded by national borders. I want to say a quick word about audience and stakeholders, and I know some of these things will come up again in our talk time. The alumni community proved, not surprisingly, an important stakeholder and audience for information, for artifacts, for attention, and in the case of overseas visiting alumni, they were the most consistent source of funds dropped in our donation box. We also set out to attract current students with consistent interest from the first-year experience and UWI Stat programs, among others. And the decision to make entry free was an effort in that direction. Thousands of students came, but the consistent and inevitable triennial turnover of the undergraduate population means that this is a consistent focus for any museum or such facility across the campuses of the UWI. Some of the most consistent high-level supporters of the museum effort were Vice Chancellor Harris, Chancellor Georgia Lane, Chancellor's medal recipient and first female principal in the UWI system, Elsa Riney, as well as Professors Marlene Hamilton and Julie Meeks, and University Registrar William Eiton. I don't say that to leave anybody out, but in terms of the university officials that helped to really carry things forward, I think they were very important. The museum was in many ways a dream realized, but the focus on creation, on collection, on networking, on communication left some structural underpinnings as well as the issue of resource provision to be overcome. I come back to where I started. The focus and the opportunity are identified at that Salises 50-50 conference in 2012, 10 whole years ago. That paper also identified one of the needs that accompanies and defines the likely success of such an effort. And it's the one that to me is almost the most important. And it's an appreciation of value. Without a context of value, all things are simply that. They're all things, they're garbage in waiting. In seeking items reflective of the origin of the UWI, there have been many examples where they had been pushed into corners and eventually disposed of because they were not valued as symbols of the institution's origins. The location and interpretation of artifacts can be a part of a wave that encompasses the signage and conservation of historic structures, the development of courses that center on actual history in the university's own backyard, the development of audiovisual and digital interactive programs that are accurate, but also engaging introductions to parts of the past, relevant not just within, but also beyond the university and even the region it serves. The creation and maintenance of facilities, the development and use of a heritage policy, because that signals to audiences, be they staff, students, visitors, policymakers, that this is a resource of value, and that giving these remnants of the past a purpose that justifies their upkeep beyond the value to history for its own sake. What we don't value, we don't adequately preserve or conserve. We don't celebrate, we don't reference in our planning, nor consider in our marketing. We don't communicate about it, we don't save it for the future. Hence the role of archives and libraries, newspapers, media-generated repositories of laws that guarantee access to information. The role of the museum, museums that collect and interpret objects as well as texts of every sort. The role of heritage sites and historic landscapes, the role of conservers and interpreters and critics. Hence the necessity to create and provide resources for facilities that can undertake these tasks. And of course, the corollary is that these facilities, if they are to survive and thrive, must be proactive in making our roles understood, as well as in analyzing and interpreting our collections for an ever wider audience, using both traditional and modern methods, giving them context, a sense of purpose, and extrinsic as well as intrinsic value. The UWI Museum is a way of holding and making value out of resources rooted in our past. And I really hope that another 10 years we'll see it not only continue to exist, but thrive through an appreciation and reflection of such value. Thank you very much.
Alison.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion. And of course, congratulations to the Uwi Museum on achieving this milestone. I just want to offer a few words about the Campus Museum Committee, of which I'm a member at the St. Augustine campus. Now there was a vision for a museum under its predecessor institution, the Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture. Unfortunately, it never materialized. However, former Deputy Principal Professor Rhoda Raddock established a working museum committee in the early 2000s, which continues to exist today. And it is chaired by Dr. Glenroy Tate, who is the head of the West Indiana and Special Collections Division at the Alma Jordan Library. The Campus Museum is a committee comprised of members of various departments that hold museum-like collections on the campus. And these include the National Herbarium of Trinidad and Tobago, that has a collection of plant material over the past 200 years. The Zoology Museum in the Department of Life Sciences is home to the Banwari burial, the oldest human remains found in the West Indies, and the Zoology Museum, which has a collection of animal species. The Department of History, from which I work, has an archaeological center, and this holds artifacts of the indigenous people and of the colonial period. The Harriet Williams Memorial Collection in the Alma Jordan Library includes photographs, artifacts, and Dr. Williams's reconstructed study. The Cocoa Research Center, which manages, for example, the International Cocoa Gene Bank Trinidad, and the Department of Creative and Festival Arts, all are some of the departments that collaborate to comprise this committee. And the Campus Museum's collections itself include photographs and other artifacts from the ICTA period, as I mentioned before, and from various departments of the St. Augustine campus. Now, at the campus, we also have a pathology museum with over 200 specimens that have a wide variety of human ailments and medical conditions for students to use as a resource, as well as an anatomy museum, which also contains many human specimens, also used as a resource for medical students. The Campus Museum Committee's purpose is to develop a historical collection and permanent exhibition to illustrate the history of the St. Augustine campus and the Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture. Its mission is to acquire, preserve, document, and display objects of historic importance and works of art relating to the UWI St. Augustine campus. The contributions of members such as Professor Raddock, Dr. Tate, Professor Bridget Barton, and Mike Rutherford, just to name a few, and of course the current members, has been very valuable. And over time, the university was able to create an inventory of objects for this particular museum committee and its purpose. In 2016, the Campus Museum Committee launched its first exhibition, which coincided with the Campus Council meeting that year. And from then, it was open to the university public. There are 3 cases that are located at 3 locations on the campus: the old administration building, the Alma Jordan Library, and the Center for Teaching and Learning. And these locations were selected because they are heavily trafficked on the campus and they afford high visibility to both staff and students. And in these locales, there is substantial engagement with the exhibits by persons. Now, the Campus Cases project, of which I'm the curator, attempts to show how life at the UWI has evolved on this particular campus, and is an effort to take the museum to the people of the campus and educate them. And the Department of History and the Alma Jordan Library, through Dr. Tate, collaborate on rotating exhibits, etc., across the campus. The Campus Museum cases are part of the teaching and learning for undergraduate heritage studies students, and they're exposed to some of the practical side of museums and their roles and contributions. And over the years, I've observed that students in the heritage studies course enjoy interacting with the objects, some of which they've never seen before, and their personal discovery of what an artifact was used for, its context, how it is part of the campus history, becomes part of their memory and also mine at the UWA. The campus cases are the first phase in promoting the Campus Museum, and this is going to be the case until a permanent building for the museum comes to fruition. Now, this has been a challenge for quite some time, and some progress was being made on the matter, but then we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which has halted it at the moment. So there's hope in the near future that the Campus Museum will add to the body of museums across the region, and will be able to exhibit the history of the campus along with some temporary displays to the public, and schools and so forth could be invited. And of course, contribute to teaching, learning, research, and training in relation to heritage studies and museum studies in the future. In general, I would say that our museums, our art galleries, our libraries, and other collections are very important to the task of preserving, presenting, and interpreting cultural heritage and natural heritage. And of course, this varies according to the audience. I would note that our museums, typically, especially in the colonial period, were seen as a representation of that colonial past. But as we have gone to independence and so forth, and concepts of nation and national identity have come to the fore in the British West Indies, we see a change and a shift of what is presented and offered to the public. And this also is attributed to research conducted by Caribbean historians such as Bridget Barton and Hilary Beckles, Vereen Shepherd, Elsa Govaya, and so forth, whose work began to inform and infiltrate how museums present and interpreted the history of the society that they sought to represent. In the region, we have so many types of museums, from museums based on people to museums based on slavery to national museums, maritime museums, and so forth. And regardless, we all see to some extent that our countries in the region have recognized the importance of heritage preservation and presentation to the public. And at an institutional level as well, the UWI has also recognized its importance and the role of museums to campus life. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Shireen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to talk briefly about the UWI Geology Museum, primarily because that's where I'm connected, and also because it is a natural history museum here at the Mona campus. And so it is interesting, not only from the point of view of a geologist, but in general. So a little bit of history on the museum. The Department of Geography and the Department of Geology, which is now the Department of Geography and Geology, started in 1961, and it had a building in the vicinity of, those who know the Mona campus, in the vicinity of Founders Park, what is now Founders Park. And there was a small collection of items that were donated by lecturers and from collections that people would have collected. And they were used as part of the teaching program back then in 1961. Later on, when the department moved to its current location on the western side of the Ring Road, we established a small museum. It started out, of course, with the teaching collections and some of the research content, research collections at the time, but it eventually was established as a museum in 1969. And somewhere around 1970, the museum opened to the public with our first curator, Peter Young, who was visiting Jamaica while he was on sabbatical from his institution in Europe. Now, it's interesting because over the life of the museum, we've had about 8 curators, and they've always been part of the teaching and research arm of the Department of Geography and Geology. And as such, we have managed to utilize our collections for teaching across various disciplines. So one of the things that bolstered our collections was the transfer of the collections, the geological collections from the Institute of Jamaica, and the material that was housed there also from the survey department. So the museum has material housed in it from the 1869 geological surveys that was conducted by, well, mid-1860s, the surveys that were conducted by Lucas Barrett and James Gates Sawkins. Now, one of the interesting things about this collection is that, for example, the Barrett material left here and then was repatriated to the museum as a gift because of the work that Barrett did in Jamaica. Barrett also, during the geological surveys at the time, well, his demise, met his demise somewhere in the waters of Port Royal, but his memory lives on through the museum and through the material that we have housed with his name on the cards that went to foreign and then came back. We also have maps or copies of maps drawn by Delabiche and by Sawkins. These were very, very early geological maps, and it chronicles some of the geological material that we have, chronicles even, for example, the Morant Bay Rebellion through some of the work by Sawkins. So we can plug in to the museum many aspects of Jamaican history and heritage. Delabiche himself, having come here as a youngster, did some geological work and then went back to England. He went back to England to form the British Geological Survey, which is one of the largest geological surveys in the world. So within the context of just memory making, the Geology Museum is sort of a little pivot of life and activity around which a lot of other activities have not emerged, but certainly they are connected, and you can see how this tentacles into other aspects of Jamaican life. I wanted to mention that within the context of how the museum functions, we had and we still do a lot of connections into the educational system in Jamaica. In fact, one of our previous curators, Ian Brown, is featured in one of our local primary school books, where they were talking about rocks and minerals in one of these science books that that existed for GSAT some long time ago. And it just goes to show how integrated geology was within the school curriculum. We had collections from the museum go to Edwin Allen, well, at the time it was comprehensive, and we've had material go to Clarendon College. We've had material and people through outreach go to Excelsior High School. So geology has been a staple on the Jamaican landscape, not only for research, but for information sharing. Because for those of you who don't know, there used to be an A-level subject in geology, and we had students in the 1960s and 70s, particularly those who went to Excelsior and those who went to Clarendon College and Edwin Allen, and I believe Rossi's High School, would have taken geology, and some of those same persons became students who deposited, when they completed their final year dissertation. That process still exists, the final year dissertation that existed from the inception of the Department of Geology back then. And those students, their thesis was part of exploratory work on Jamaican geology, and those are also housed in the Geology Museum. So if we were to start to pinpoint some of the persons who were active, some of them are retired now, within the Jamaican sphere in terms of geology, they had their interactions with the collections and collections even for themselves, having collected material that got deposited in the museum. We have also in the past had visiting researchers and collaborators that have come into the museum and added value. So we've had recently, we've had somebody who was studying lizards, and it's fascinating because she was looking at fossil lizards and she was looking at lizard bones, some very tiny things, and she was able to talk about the lizard bones from the point of view of their species, using material that was deposited in the museum. And that material, when she started to study it, can tell us more about how we had speciation across the Greater Antilles with respect to lizards. Can you imagine? We also have in our museum collections what we call a missing link species, Pisocirin portelli, which is a 50 million year old manatee. And that manatee, the material was collected from a place called Seven Rivers in just south of Montego Bay. And it was the first of its kind found in the world that indicated that manatees were like hippopotamus. They would be on land and in water at the same time. Why am I saying all of this? I want us to see that within just this one little geology museum, this one little space that houses rocks, that somebody would think, why are you collecting rocks? That you can see the various bits of history that is connected to the museum. We have a specimen of rudist bivalve that we got from a place called Logie Green out in central Jamaica. And it was the first specimen that allowed for the study of that species in Jamaica, and it assisted with the study of that species in other parts of the Caribbean. In fact, rudist bivalves in Jamaica have the largest diversity of species, second to Mexico. And of course, Mexico is larger than we are. So obviously, you know, that could be one of the reasons. But within the context of just geology, and the people who work in geology or worked in geology at the time, they tentacled into the rest of society. And we can look at their work and be able to look at some of the various aspects of our history and our heritage. In our buildings, in our historic structures, we can see the geology, and we can see where the exploration of various rocks and minerals have added value to what we do today. Think of cement company. Think of just limestone that we use for ordinary processes. Think of beach sand, think of river sand. All of this culminates in the geological surveys and the study and the collection of material across Jamaica to build up our maps. And these same maps are what we use for our ordinary everyday exploration. So I hope that gives you an idea, maybe teach you a little bit of geology, but also plugs you into geoheritage and why it is important to look at substrate, which is terra firma, which is rock, and how that rock is on which many other things stand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shireen. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask all my colleagues to turn on their cameras now. We're going to, right, let me just, all right. Okay, all right, great. So I like our introduction, right? Because it's not only about the institution's history, but also about the kind of work that we do in the business of research and teaching that is in essence fundamental to what we're trying to do, fundamental to our mandate and our commitment to the region. But in this business of memory making, whether it's research and teaching collections or museums, I think we need to kind of trouble the water a little bit. I mean, we have some beautiful things to say, but with all things, they require kind of additional analysis. And so my question is this, what do you think based on your experiences, are the key factors at the university that shape memory making?
You want us to start in any order?
Any order, first come, first serve.
I think one of the factors is to be prepared to take risks. Within the context of, all right, I'll give you an example from the Geology Museum. A lot of people have aversion to the idea of mining. But you come into a geology museum, you're gonna hear about rocks that have been mined, and you're gonna hear about bauxite, and you're gonna hear about limestone. And there's always this stigma that's attached. And one of the things, we had signs in the museum that would indicate that if it's not grown, it's mined. And it generated a conversation so that people can talk about the conservation, but people can also talk about the destruction to the environment. And so everybody is throwing something into this pot. And they leave with this conversation, which is part of their own memory making, their visit to the museum and what it revealed to them. And they take that home into their communities and generate a conversation. And so within that context, we are sort of not only memorializing an event, but we're also making connections into our local community. You don't walk past a rock the same way again. You don't see an excavator digging down the side of a hill or a truck with sand in the same way. And so it allows one a bit of consciousness that allows them to come into a secondary, I'm gonna say secondary reality of what they probably would have heard elsewhere and anywhere. So, you know, that would be my contribution to some of the factors. I think taking the risk and allowing the museum to give the person their experience and allowing that discourse to go on.
Alison,
I think in general, in terms of what basically shapes memory making at the UWI, I think the people shape memory. Whether you're a staff member, whether you're a student, you become part of that shared past and identity of UWI to your present. So the people themselves become part of that memory making. And UWI in itself is a lived experience. Whether you've lived there on hall, whether you've worked there, been educated there over the decades. And the university goes through various phases and it expands and develops over time, adding new programs, buildings, departments, all of these different things, museums and all these different things. And in each of these phases of UWI's history, memories are going to be created and shaped. So I think that the experiences that you have there also shape this memory, whether it's between a student or a lecturer, among student groups studying, doing medical experiments, visiting the museums, doing archaeological digs, whatever, your student life, and of course your biggest day, graduation, all of this generates memory. And at the UWI, we in itself generate a lot of memorabilia, and that is held by alumni and former staff, from old ID cards to uniforms and sports gear and graduation booklets. All of these are part of memory. And even moments that may not necessarily conjure positive thoughts are also part of those memories. Student protests on campus are part of those memories, and passing on those oral histories over time is part of that memory making and shaping, is what I would add as well.
You're muted, Susan. You're still muted.
There you go.
Yeah.
Here I am. I want to build on a couple of those points, and I want to raise one that I think is important. There's so many things that the university, the museum system, if you like, in the university has to offer, actually and potentially, for the region. You know, there's a whole question of the role, the part of what Alison was saying, on an individual level, but also in terms of the role that the university as a whole has played in regional development. That whole process that has gone on from 1948, coming up 75 years. which has been so instrumental and in so many ways plugs into aspects of regional development. There's a whole question of not only the artifacts of the university itself, but the artifacts of the places where the university has planted itself. The Mona campus, the St. Augustine campus are two that have deep historical roots. And so I think the whole question of conservation and interpretation of those historical stories are part of what the university can do. There's a whole question of intellectual capital in terms of what the university has brought, not only in terms of the experience of students, their cards, their ID cards, their student protests, etc., but also the things that some of them Shireen has talked about in terms of in terms of geology, in terms of some of the projects and the things that people have become involved in. But across every single faculty and across every single department, there is that. And the whole question of collection, again, Alison mentioned it, but I think of it in terms of the structures, things like university archives, the record departments, making sure that some of that material continues to be conserved and preserved so that down the road we will have history to analyze and to talk about, because some of those things, I can think of things like the REU, the Radio Education Unit, which used to be a huge collector of audio material, which no longer exists. I mean, to an extent, it is still now part of the university archive, but there's a whole set of material that used to exist that is no longer necessarily being generated and kept and cared for. And when we come in 20 years to try and analyze the way in which university has developed, how are we going to do that? What is the basis if resources are not made available and people are not made available to make sure that these things continue to be collected? And so the bigger point that I wanted to make, I think you're right. I think the individuals are so very important, but the institutional interest and appreciation of heritage and history and museums and interpretation, if that is not there, then what happens when the individuals retire, when they move on? And if those structures are not there that ensures that even if a new individual doesn't see it, doesn't get it, or maybe takes a while to get it, that the collection, the preservation, the conservation, the interpretation, the communication, the engagement, that all of these things continue. And that would be my contribution to that.
Absolutely. I think one of the things the pandemic has also posed too is the fact that even the process of memory making is also contemporary. It's happening at this moment. And when we think about the impact of the pandemic on university life, right? So there are going to be students who are graduated without any real campus experience because more than 2/3 of their degree is spent on a computer. And that is that. And one of the things I've been thinking about, and Susan knows I've been thinking about this, is how do we actually document that as well, right? Because one of the things is that, when we're engaging alum and so on, they, looking back on their experience, see themselves as social actors and they see their experiences as valid, right? And it's instrumental to us understanding the evolution of the university. But I think current students don't see themselves as social actors. And if you weren't on campus for 2 years and you never met your lecturer personally, what is your narrative of your university experience, right? And what is that construction of memory there? And I think this moment really kind of poses challenges, right? Because, this is something Shireen and I have spoken about, even in terms of bringing people in, publicizing the museums, ensuring that even among our collections management, that we're constantly speaking to each other. And while the pandemic gave us Zoom and live streaming, we still have to find solutions to the other issues that have occurred. Susan, you have something else you want to add?
I want to say that I think engagement engagement is such an important thing for museums and other organizations which have a business with conserving and interpreting and getting out there.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Susan, go ahead.
No, Shireen, I just wanted to, I think that the whole business of the onlineization of life was coming, right? Yes. The pandemic made it worse. It also made some aspects of the way to deal with it better.
Yeah.
Right? Because some of the platforms and so on have improved. Okay. So, but you know, if you look at the whole museum, the talk, the whole issue of, you know, how do you capture things like Twitter? How do you capture the kind of online conversations? All of these things, some of them were already out there in the air. Okay. What this does is it makes it more imperative for us to deal with it. And I think things like, one of the things I have just felt so strongly about this from 2014, I've been talking about this. I think that in addition to the physical, we need to be dealing with the online. And part of that is reaching out to the people that we're trying to connect with, right?
Yes.
Whatever it is, whether it is by social media or whether it is by a structured, developed online space where people can have some of the experiences. And it is not going to replace, obviously, being on campus and, you know, meeting your lecturer and stuff. But in terms of experiencing, being part of something, some of that can be created online. And to me, for the Uwi Museum, I always felt we needed to have the physical and the online. And online was partly, yes, about the Uwi Museum story, but it was also about this story of how the university has contributed to and has drawn in our region, this thing that we are a part of, right? And where is that story told? That story can be told online. Online, nobody needs a plane to get there. Nobody needs a bridge or a ferry, all of which are things I love, don't feel any way. But in terms of, you know, reaching into these stories that we tell and capturing the essence of these memories and having the knowledge and the information and access to what is out there in the various collections.
Yeah.
I just think that there is another opportunity that we have not captured.
Yeah. I have a note here where I was scribbling down for this particular question. It said it must be immersive and the narrative should be open. And the online environment really draws us into that immersion, because I can immerse myself in a virtual museum, in a virtual tour. And because it allows me to write a note or write my experience, not just in a visitor's book, but for others to see and comment on my experience, it also adds to the memory banking of the experience of that place or artifact or space. So I just wanted to add that on top of Susan's comment.
Alison?
Yes, I definitely agree that, you know, we have to have more of an engagement online and face-to-face. And just continuing with Shireen's point, with the interaction online, of course, what museums always want is that feedback from its audience, and always want engagement and audience participation. And from those comments and so forth, sometimes we have valuable lessons and where we need to strategize on what type of audience we are actually generating interest from and who are we not reaching. And that also can bring information that can also help curators and so forth to better serve the public in terms of what their mission is as well.
Yeah.
Shani, I know you're coming back, but I just wanted to say one of the things that I think we did really well at the Uwi Museum was when we did the Confrontations Exhibition in 2018. So the Confrontations Exhibition was a look at student protests at the University of the West Indies. And we looked at the broad sweep from the very beginnings all the way across, you know, including things that happened in Barbados and in Trinidad. Is the University of the West Indies Museum. That's what we wanted to do. But we focused on the Rodney situation in in 1968. And it was 50 years from there. And they were important. That was important for a number of reasons. But what I wanted to say was one of the most absolutely popular aspects of that exhibition was a protest board that we created. And I can remember Samantha Campbell, who is Shani's
everything, my everything.
Up the stool in that museum, making these little posters. And we got the little fudge sticks, you know, and we cut out little posters, little placards, and anybody who came into the museum could take a placard and they could write what their beef was whether in relation to the ongoing issues coming out of that Confrontations exhibition, or in relation to other things that were really kind of bugging you, you know. There were a couple of things we discouraged school kids from that kind of just weren't taking the conversation very far, but we really encouraged them to think about what were the things they were getting from the exhibition, what were the things they wanted to say to other people, what were the things that really got their goat, and they could write it down and they could post it on that board, right? And from time to time, we would take pictures of the board and we post that on the blog. So it's an effort to create, in a sense, a kind of feedback loop, you know. And there were some other things we did that involved kids making posters and helping us to create some of that material and so on. And I really do think engagement is absolutely vital. You know, it can be engagement with, in a sense, ready-made audiences like the alumni, you know, that it's so very often, it's just, I think for the alumni in particular, and for persons who have worked at the university, a pleasure to have things recognized as having an importance. But we had a lot of that kind of engagement. But we also sought to engage with current students and with people who were not students, but potentially maybe are going to be university students down the road. So, yeah.
So what would you say are some of the challenges? I'll start out with Alison. What would you say are some of the challenges to the efforts that we're making, you know, to memory making and museums on the campus?
Financial support. I think that's you know, one of the key things that we need to put on the board and put it in play. Of course, you know, staffing and resources. Of course, you know, I think that there's a message that needs to be sent to have buy-in from the public, whether it's university as the public or the public as the wider public. That university is important to the community, it is important to the region. And the types of things that we want to do in terms of our museums and so forth have a broader role and importance, not only to the university community, but to societies in which we live in and to the region. And hopefully with that support and understanding from stakeholders, whether it is government, NGOs, business, the university alumni, etc., perhaps, you know, that is one of the things that can help us overcome one of these major challenges, I think, that, you know, we would face. Yes.
Yeah. Shireen or Susan?
I would underscore financial, but I also think that, well, let me look at first financial, and then obviously space. Space constraints is a serious problem. We started out in a small space, and that space you outgrow pretty quickly if you are catering to a public. But I think one of the main challenges for our space is that people, other than the curator, people don't identify with our space. And when I say identify, I mean, people want museums and they want people in them and they want people to visit and they want it to be relevant. But you also, as the budget holder or the statute maker, let's say that, need to also identify with the space so that you're one of the stakeholders. You will then help to sell this space so we can get the resources that we need. It's not only about identifying how many people you want in the museum every year, or how many exhibitions you've put in, or are you hosting anybody, or, you know, but if you don't give us tour guides, if you don't pay for tour guides, if you don't pay for archival material, then what are we doing? And so it then becomes the responsibility of the single curator in many respects to find everything that needs to be put in, and to make it work, to deliver the deliverables that, I'm going to say, the quote unquote powers that be require. And I just believe that it is not that we haven't sold it to them, because they know they've made a list of all the things that they want to achieve or want you to achieve, but they need themselves to identify and buy in with the space and the process. And without them being connected as I don't want to call them the chief stakeholders, because I mean, I think the public is, but they have a responsibility also to the space and not only the curator. And so I believe that the space constraints, the resources, the identity, or the connection with what the space means and what it provides, and the relevance that engagement brings to the identity of the museum itself is important. So I strongly believe that the people on the campus, whether you're going to the Geology Museum or the Uwi Museum or Zoology or wherever, as stakeholders and as part of the institution, they must feel like they're connected. They must feel like they belong. And it is through this belonging that we extend that to the public, and they will see what we treasure, they will see what we preserve, and be able to do that in the wider society towards resilience.
I agree. I mean, it's hard not to. I think human resources, you know, having people to do the work that needs to be done on a consistent basis, that it's absolutely important. You know, the money is as basic as it can get. But I think all of that has to be rooted in what you were just saying about, in a sense, recognition by the persons who are, by the institution, recognition of value, celebration of that value, putting in place policies that make sure that that will be there'll be a continuity going forward. You know, and then in that context, all of these other things can happen, all of the engagement and the communication and so on, the conservation, the making sure that things hold up.
Right.
Yeah.
I also want to take this time to recognize some of the positive comments we've been getting from our Facebook live viewers. Alison Fong says, congratulations, Uwi Museum. I want to say big up, Alison, because you're one of our strongest supporters. We have Hazel Griffin. She's glad to have been not just at the opening, but assisting Susan in numerous background research projects that shaped the initial Origins exhibition. The Uwi Museum is a valuable asset to the Uwi community, and long may this be so. We have from Nigel Harris, right? Says, thank you, Susan, for your tremendous contribution to building the Uwi Regional headquarters. I pray that this effort will continue to thrive. Carol Edwards also says, congratulations on this milestone. The Uwi Museum is such a treasure. Donette Zaka from says the Jamaica Photography Society has had the opportunity of attending lectures and viewing exhibitions that were first-class experiences. And of course, we would not be able to do this without our audience and stakeholders. And we've all touched on this in our conversations about what role stakeholders play, but also let's think about just the diverse audiences. What does it mean regionally in the UAE for this memory making process, and how do we straddle the balance? You know, one of the concerns that, and Susan and I have discussed this, is that one of the concerns I've had is the museum's proximity to Mona. You know, it's like it makes it a little difficult sometimes. I mean, and we've been hustling, right? But the proximity to Mona, even given Mona's significance as a first campus, has actually played just a little bit of a problem, I would say, about our one Uwi policy, right? And so I don't know, should we have museums on every campus and then have a museums committee, right? And so what does this diverse identities and stakeholders mean for this kind of notion of UWI for UWI?
Listen, what Alison talked about Prof. Ruddock, right? I remember Prof. Ruddock visiting the museum and visiting the regional headquarters and talking about the efforts in Trinidad. The museum, the physical spaces have to be somewhere, right? And because UWI is a regional space, the physical spaces are going to be far from somewhere else, right? Part of it is a conversation we have to have. Listen, I remember we did a Cave Hill at 50 exhibition, right? And I remember it was fascinating. A lady from Jamaica came in and she was really vexed. Why were we doing an exhibition about Cave Hill in Jamaica? Why Cave Hill can't the exhibition about Cave Hill in Cave Hill? And I'm like, lady, this is a regional institution, okay? Cave Hill is a part of UWI, all right? We are one organization. But at the same time, one has to recognize, this is why I say, I think a physical space is on each campus, in each territory. They're absolutely essential, right? There are some things that are better done in person. There are some interactions that are better in person. And people like to see real things. So no matter how you go online, one of these days, you're going to want to see the skeleton that they have in Trinidad, right? Mm-hmm. If you are involved in zoology and so on, or it begins with a R, Shireen, I can never get that name right. The various stones or whatever it is that you guys have. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't take advantage of the opportunity that online provides for us to tell a story that everybody can access equally. And then if you are in Trinidad or at Cave Hill in Barbados or in Mona in Jamaica or at Five Islands or wherever you are, you have the opportunity to go in and experience what is there. So I think those things are real. They're realities. We can't get away from them. We have to address them. Sorry.
I think no man, I agree with you, Susan. And I think internally, I think we know that, right? I mean, one of the things that I would say is just other than financial resources to shape our museum spaces, we actually, and this is something that faces all museums regionally, we actually need policies and procedures. Yeah. Right? Those are the key things that institutionalize museums. And also we need conversation and kind of collaborative work with each other. So not just the policies and procedures, but the ways in which we come behind the scenes to do the kind of advocacy work. I think one of the challenges I think happens is that people see exhibitions as the outward manifestation of the work that a museum does, but nobody else sees the other things that have to happen behind the scenes around collections management, documenting, researching, and what the absence of policies do, what they do, you know, when you're trying to do the kind of documenting and so on. So all of the two components for me are very important. And so while yes, we need money, we also need a secure infrastructure for the survival of our institutions.
100%.
Yeah. So okay, so we have just like two more questions. We have actually addressed one of them, which is what are some of the difficulties that shape memory making? And it's really the challenges around absence of resources, absence of space, proper policies. And this is not specific to the university, but it's specific, it happens regionally.
And vision, Shani.
Yes.
Vision.
Absolutely, that we need to be very clear on the look and so on. I think that's an important part of the museum committee as well in St. Augustine, to how do you begin that process, the kind of the vision for what the museum will look like and what it would do, but also the importance for all of us to be speaking with each other, share a kind of shared vision as well. Because if we're speaking to each other, then we can become our own best advocates. So one of the things that I have, and I was really thinking about the Mona campus, but I think it also is valid for St. Augustine, and it's really about that reconstruction of memory, right? And I think of all the memorials that have been done on the Mona campus, as it deals with slavery, enslavement, or the Gibraltar camp. And what are some of the difficulties about that reconstructing, right? So the memories are important, the things are a key part of our landscape, but what are some of the issues about that reconstructing component? Like, how do we choose what to reconstruct and when and why, and who does the choosing? Those are very, because we're occupying, the university sits on landscapes that are rich, right? They're very, very rich. And it's some of it is about also what do we choose when and who does the choosing and why.
I think the approach, I think the whole question of interpretation is one that requires conversation. It requires research. It requires information. It requires, in a sense, argument, certainly discourse. One of the things that I think of when I think about the question that you're asking relates today. So on the Mona campus, there are 4 obelisks, aside from heritage signs. And I know that some of the other campuses have heritage signs, because I remember discussions with Cave Hill, I think it was, about the heritage signage that was done at Mona. But when we were doing the obelisks, which, by the way, the idea came from the geography and geology obelisk, to which I give acknowledgement before Shireen goes and digs me out. We have obelisks that were put up to represent populations that have lived on the campus over time. And so there are 2 that reflect the Papina and Mona sugar estate, the enslaved population of those estates. There's one that reflects the indentured or formerly indentured East Indian population that was at one point significantly living in the Papine area and significantly employed on the Mona estate late in the 1800s. And then the Gibraltar camp one. But what I wanted to mention in terms of the 2 that reflect the enslaved populations is that in thinking about what should go on those things, what we came up with was what I think is, in a sense, history with a political flavor. And I think that's an inevitability. What we did was we put the names of persons who we believed through research were still alive on that camp, on that site, on those 2 sites at the end of slavery. And I think that's an important, it comes out of a focus on overcoming. And so the only censuses that existed across time for those populations were a series of censuses that were done between 1817 and 1832 as part of the whole administration, if you like, of the ending of slavery. And in a sense, also coming to the whole compensation situation. But those were lists that existed. They exist right throughout the Caribbean. And they include a baseline done in 1817 and then triennial increase and decrease records. And so by going through those records, what we came up with was these lists of people. And so those people's names are on those obelisks, as well as some information about the estate, right? And so what I wanted to say in relation to your question, Shireen, really had to do with the whole process and the whole discussion and the whole debate and the whole reasoning that comes into how you decide to do something, right? Because you could have just put all the names that you had from 1817 to 1832. It wouldn't be all the names because those estates existed from 1750 odd. And so there would be a whole, 50, 60, nearly 70 years of people who still don't get on there. So you have to take a decision on what are you trying to do, and what is the messaging, and what is the rationale of what you're trying to do, right? So there are always going to be discussions, and there are always going to be differences. But I think if there's a reasoning and a research basis, so that we're not just floating balloons, you know, I think that's an important element of that conversation.
Yeah, I would say that parameters, I agree, are essential, because you have to think of what is it that you want to convey to the public? What is the message that I want them to understand? Am I being clear in my communication? And sometimes some people may say you've excluded, or you haven't included, or why have you silenced, and why have you privileged? But sometimes, you know, those sorts of decisions have to be taken in order to meet the parameters of what you're trying to convey. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. And sorry, Shireen, it's you. It's not an end of life situation, right? You put up the sign, you can still have conversations afterwards. You can still publish.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely.
I've been doing some research for the last couple of years on absence heritage, and because it is so vast, I can't finish my article. I think it might end up being a book, because the article it just keeps getting larger. But one of the things that we recognize is there are two things I'm going to point out. One of the things we recognize is that within the context of memory making in this particular sense, when the author decides to just put some information down, sometimes the information is biased to one group or to another group or to somebody's own idea of what something should be. And one of the things that we experience, at least through the writings and what we've been looking at to expand the definition of absence heritage or heritage of absence, is to do exactly what you've suggested, Susan. You provide all the information, and all the information does not mean 500,000 names, but certainly information that does not, you haven't removed the people from the setting, so that you can then take that conversation and go and look up more information. So it's immersive as well as it's instructional. So it provides you with a way in, as well as those people who have discomfort about the situation, it also provides them with a way out. The second thing I wanted to mention was that one of the things that we've been defining is that museums in themselves absent material from the narrative. And in putting these signs and signage, whether you have a site like Uwi that is rich, right? What we've done is allowed for our material to be out there without people touching and feeling it, because then you're not giving them the book with all the names, but you're giving them something so they can go and find this information if they so desire. But it provides us with a richer experience of things, because our museums within themselves, we really keep material safe, but in keeping them safe, we keep them away from people. So the more we are able to demonstrate and explain in some way, as Susan described, what we're doing and how we've done it and why we've done it this way, it allows for, let's just say, conscious thought on the part of the people who experience this signage or this artifact or this item. And I think it's very, very important in a space like Mona, because I like rocks, I like geology, but I like the rocks and the geology that tells me something else, because without that something else, it's just rocks. And so seeing an obelisk and that obelisk gives me a name, I now have a connection to this physical space that is just the Uwi campus as historic. It tells you people were here. It tells you people did things, and it tells you things were done to people, if you understand what I mean. So it gives you breadth and depth all at the same time.
I think one of the things that I remember talking to one of the there are a lot of people at the University of the West Indies regional headquarters and beyond. I mean, people like Glenroy Tate in Trinidad, you know, but people, so many people people like Joy Pilgrim and Roy Auger, who always said that they were two living artifacts and I should give them a chair in the University Museum. And I think that was such a wonderful idea. Would have been a great exhibition.
I could send one your way as well. Ted Robinson would join them easily.
It's just so important. But one of the people in the technical side, Derval Dali. Derval, I know we had all these conversations about something he wanted to be involved with on the Mona campus that involved putting more, putting access to more information by whether it's sightlines or locations or symbols or signs or artifacts or whatever it was, so that people, whether by smartphone or whatever it is, could QR codes, however it was done, could actually get more information. And I think that that thing of how you engage people, you know, you put up a sign and yeah, it's a good thing. It's really an important thing, but it's not a be all and end all. Because sometimes people don't see signs. They're walking, looking on their phone. They don't see the sign unless they buck their toe, you know, then they're not seeing it. And so how do you draw attention? How do you engage people? How do you say, okay, so you see these people whose names are on this Papine obelisk? Well, you see that guy, there's a woman, her name was Amelia. Last name is escaping me. We know her story. We know something of her story. There's a young woman named Harriet Wildman. She appears in a couple of historical sources. She was an enslaved person on the Papine estate, but we actually know something of her story. There's a guy called Frederick Walford. He was a runaway. There's actually stuff in media sources and in colonial office record sources that refer to him, right? How do we, yeah, you have the obelisk and the obelisk is there and the names are there. So here's an entree, right? But you want to know who these guys were? Not all of them were nameless and faceless, right? Absolutely. We know more about some of them. Yes. So how can we take the next step and put something there that says, if you want to know who these people were, okay, we don't know about all of them. We can give you mini genealogies of some of them, which is great and also something we should do, but we know about these. You want to know more about them? Here, this is how you find out more about them.
Yeah.
Right.
It brings the heritage to life. It's
right.
no
And
longer absent.
It means
we have absence present for all of us. Yeah.
But it also means to Suzanne and Shireen that and Alison that we actually need heritage museum committees on our campuses. That's what we need. Active committees, right? Because part of the issue is and why we recognize that it's useful for teaching. Part of the issue is that it's a one-man show, or it's a group of people
with similar interests.
Right? Talking to ourselves,
right?
Talking to ourselves without money.
But the thing is, about the Mona campus has its the heritage tours that they do, right? And so. And I think that is a model that I think they hope at some point to expand to the other landed campuses. And so I think that what we actually need is a support base for like that tour, because the tours are the marrying of heritage and the intellectual work that comes from the output of the university. And this is something that we really have to think about. However, we are approaching our closing time. And this is something that we could really spend all day talking about. So I'm going to ask each of my panelists for 30-second closing remarks, because we've answered all our questions. We've answered all our questions and we put new ones on the table. And so just a 30-second closing remark.
Who are you looking at?
Okay. Okay. Suzanne, do you want to go first?
I think we have to connect the individual and the institutional. I think we have to find ways of getting appreciation of the value that is there in all of the areas that we are in the history, but also in all the other areas of intellectual enterprise, so that there is a sense of purpose and a sense of reason for resourcing these things which can make such a contribution.
Shireen?
Yeah, I would underscore that, Susan. I could almost say you took my answer straight out of my head. But I really think that our spaces are relevant to us, and we have to now put ourselves in a position to make our, and it's relevant to those in our groups, and relevant to those of us who talk with each other, who are basically interested in the same thing, museums and history and heritage. But what we have to do now is try to galvanize the university community in a way such that our spaces are not just relevant, but they are part of people's everyday thought process and activity. So if you need to know about X, you go to the Geology Museum. You need to know about Y, you go to the Uwi Museum. There's a whole circuit of information that is available to our campus community. There's a whole circuit of material that's available to our wider UWI 1 Uwi community. And we have to put ourselves in a position to be present for people, because otherwise us and our collections become absent to them.
I would just close by saying that I think that what we probably will need to do more of is have more partnerships and collaborations. We need to talk more with each other in terms of the institution of the University of the West Indies. You have to talk more and engage more with our stakeholders, whether it's our alumni, our students, NGOs, the government, and so forth, and see how we can all work together for this common mission to promote the importance and value of the University of the West Indies. It has done tremendous work politically, socially, economically, culturally for the entire region. And as heritage and historians and museum professionals, we also need to ensure that that aspect is not only preserved, but it's communicated and it is engaged with throughout our campuses as much as possible.
All right, so I just want to extend my little thank you to all of you for doing this with me. We're planning this for a while and it wasn't quite going how I envisioned. I want to thank our audience. We really can't do this work without you. I want to say big up to Samantha, who's my backbone, because you need a person to work with you in this kind of work that is sharing a lot of the responsibilities and conceptual framework and the research. So we're going to end with a little slideshow of photographs from the work being done at Uwi Museum over the years. I just ask that, we need to just do a round of applause, because this is it's a lot of investment and work, and it could not have been done not only with just Susan's determination, but also all the persons that supported the work that has been done over the last 10 years. And we ask that you continue to support us over the next 10 years, as we kind of just dig down and work through it all. So we're going to transition to the Scheid slideshow, and we're going to all turn off our cameras for a few minutes. Panelists, thank you so much.